the death toll climb following the murderous rampage of an Ozark mountain community. Officials counted 16 people dead, 14 of them members of the suspect's family.
December 28, 1987. Ronald Gene Simmons walked into this Arkansas law office and opened fire. This was his stop after murdering 14 members of his own family over Christmas without mercy. Just pure calculated evil. These are serial killers who brutally killed their families.
I'm saying I've wanted to kill my mother since I was 8 years old, and I'm not proud of that.
August 27th, 1964. It started with a fight in the kitchen. 15-year-old Ed Kemper grabbed his grandfather's .22 rifle and shot his grandmother in the head. Then, as calmly as if he were taking out the trash, he waited for his grandfather to come home and shot him too. When police asked why, Ed didn't offer any tragic excuse nor fake remorse. He simply said,
"I just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma."
He also explained he killed his grandfather so that he wouldn't find out that his wife had been murdered. And just like that, the world met a boy who would grow up to become one of the most disturbing serial killers in American history. December 18th, 1948, born in Burbank, California, Edmund Kemper III was big from the start. At age 15, he stood over 6 feet tall, but his size wasn't the only thing that set him apart. He was also extremely intelligent, with an IQ of 145, and he was also deeply disturbed. From childhood, Kemper's behavior was frightening. He killed the family cats, not once, but twice. He took the heads off his sister's dolls, played pretend execution games like gas chamber with her, and even stalked his second-grade teacher. His home life was no safer than the thoughts in his head. His mother, Clarnell, was an emotionally abusive alcoholic who constantly tore him down. She said he was worthless, told him no woman would ever love him, and even made him sleep in the basement, afraid he might hurt his sisters. His father, a Second World War veteran, once said that the nuclear bomb testing was easier than living with his mom, Clarnell. And after the couple divorced, Ed was sent to live with his grandparents, Maud and Edmund Kemper. It didn't help. Ed claimed his grandmother, Maud, was cruel and emasculating. He once said,
"She thought she had more balls than any man."
Eventually, he snapped. At age 15, he killed both grandparents and then called his mother to confess.
And if it had been in a city, I would have been a mass murderer at age 15. I would have killed until they gunned me down. I wouldn't have been able to reason my way out of it.
So he's committed to the Atascadero State Hospital, a facility for the criminally insane. Doctors there diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, but also noticed how intelligent and charming he was. He got along with the staff, studied psychology, and even helped test other inmates. And then at 21, they let him out. After his release, Ed moved back in with the one person who terrified him the most, his mother. She's now working at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Ed, towering 6'9", tried to start over. He wanted to be a cop, but he was rejected for being too big. So instead, he befriended the local cops at the bar and took a job with the Department of Transportation, driving the highways of California. And that's when he noticed something. Hitchhikers, women, all alone. At first, he just picked them up for conversation. He said he drove over 100 girls without incident, but he was fantasizing, and eventually, he acted. He once said,
"One side of me says, wow, she's pretty. I'd love to talk to her. The other side says, I wonder how her head would look on a stick."
Damn. May 1972. He picked up Mary Ann Pesky and Anita Lucchesa near Berkeley. He drives them to a remote spot, kills them, and stuffs their bodies into his trunk. On the way home, a police officer stopped him for a broken taillight, but didn't search the car. He takes the bodies home, violates them more, then dismembered and dumped them. No one ever suspected a thing, and Kemp continued killing throughout 1972 and 73, targeting women who reminded him of what he thought his mother admired: beauty, youth, and confidence. The violence escalated, and his depravity would worsen to the point that he once buried a severed head in his mother's garden, facing her bedroom window. Why? Well, his answer was,
"Because she always wanted people to look up to her."
And as you can imagine, his real target had always been Clarnell herself.
My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her.
April 20th, 1973. Ed waited for his mom to fall asleep. Then he bludgeoned her with a claw hammer, took her head off, and violated it too. He even used it as a dartboard, shouted at it for hours. shoved her vocal cords into the garbage disposal, and when they got stuck, he said,
"That seemed appropriate. She screamed at me for years."
So if that wasn't enough, he invites his best friend over and kills her as well. Then he flees to Colorado, expecting a manhunt, but days passed and there was nothing. So Ed Kemper did something unthinkable. He called the police and confessed. At first, they didn't believe him.
"Big Ed? The friendly guy from the jury room bar who chatted with cops all the time? No way."
But when he started describing details only the killer could know, then they took him seriously. Kemper was convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder. He's asking for the death penalty, but instead he gets 7 life sentences. He's still alive today, at the age of 76, serving time at California Medical Facility. In prison, he's become a model inmate, talking to the feds, narrating audiobooks, even helping schedule inmate therapy appointments. Some say he's reformed, but his own half-brother said it best.
"He could look you straight in the eye, tell you how sorry he is, while planning your death, and you never know."
They can say I'm the biggest mass murderer in the United States and everywhere else, you know.
January 11th, 1983. A drifter named Henry Lee Lucas was picked up in Texas for carrying an illegal firearm. It seemed like a routine arrest. It wasn't. Lucas's story is tangled, horrifying, and soaked in contradictions. Upon his arrest, he's confessing to more than 300 killings, a number so absurd it earned him the nickname, the Confession Killer. Many of those confessions turned out to be lies, but some weren't. Because before the exaggerations, before the media circus, and before the fast food runs with the police, Lucas had already committed one murder that was very real and very personal. He killed his own mom. His early life read like a blueprint of a future killer. 1936, born in Blacksburg, Virginia. He's raised in a house where love did not exist. His mother, Viola, was an alcoholic prostitute who often beat him, forced him to watch her with her clients, and then once sent him to school in a dress just to humiliate him. She even refused to treat an eye infection when he was 10, and he lost that eye. So what about his father? Well, he was a legless former railroad worker and froze to death after passing out drunk. By the time Lucas hit puberty, he was torturing animals, molesting his half-brother, and spiraling into violent fantasies. And then came the night that changed everything. 1960. After a heated argument with his mom, who reportedly told him to move out and threatened to have him institutionalized, Lucas snapped. He grabs a knife and just stabs her in the neck. He later said that he only meant to slap her, but when he looked down, the knife was in his hand, and she was bleeding out on the floor. He said,
"All I remember was slapping her. Then I noticed she'd been cut."
Viola Lucas died from internal bleeding, and Henry was convicted of second-degree murder, but served only 10 years. 10 years for killing the woman who'd brought him into this world, and who'd broken him long before he picked up a blade and claimed the lives of many more. So after his release, Lucas eventually landed in Jacksonville, Florida, where he met Otis Toole, another deeply troubled guy with a violent past. They hit it off instantly, become lovers, and then partners, and then something much darker. Toole had his own nightmare childhood. He too was molested, forced into sex work by his father, and reportedly set fire to homes as a minor. He also killed his first victim at age 14 by running over a man who tried to pick him up for sex. Together, Lucas and Toole formed a deadly duo. They shared more than trauma, a twisted urge to kill. Lucas once said,
"He was doing his crimes all wrong. I showed him how to do them right."
After the next few years, they claimed they'd crisscrossed 26 U.S. states, leaving victims in their wake. Hitchhikers, sex workers, migrants, and random travelers. They even claimed to have dabbled in cannibalism. In a prison phone call, Toole once said to Lucas,
"Some taste like real meat when it's got barbecue sauce on it."
Whether it was a sick joke or a real memory, no one's sure. So after his arrest in Texas in 1983, Lucas started talking. He confessed to hundreds of murders, some with Toole, some on his own. At first, the police were thrilled. Lucas was helping him solve cold cases. He even drew detailed portraits of victims and led him to remote crime scenes. And Lucas enjoyed the attention. Police took him on field trips, let him eat fast food, and some say they even fed him clues, just to close unsolved files faster.
I was a king. I had everything I wanted, everything possible that a man could want.
Meanwhile, Toole, locked up in Florida, began backing up the stories. He claimed they'd killed at least 108 people, including a boy named Adam Walsh. If that name sounds familiar, it should. Adam's father, John Walsh, would later become the host of America's Most Wanted. Toole confessed to abducting Adam from a Sears parking lot, decapitating him, and driving around with the boy's head in his car. Later, he said he tossed it into a canal. Whether that confession was true remains a matter of debate to this day. However, eventually, investigators began to realize something was off about the couple's confessions. Timelines didn't add up. DNA testing contradicted the claims, and some confessions were flat out impossible. Lucas himself had been in prison or out of the state at the time. In the end, Lucas admitted that he made most of it up. He tells reporters,
"I only got 3, but they're going wild every time I tell them about some more."
The damage, though, was already done. Families who thought they had closure were left in limbo, and worst of all, some of the real killers may still be out there. Lucas was eventually sentenced to death, but later had it reduced to life in prison after questions about his confession surfaced. He died in 2001 of heart failure, and Toole died 5 years earlier in 1996. Both men had left behind a legacy of horror, confusion, and unanswered questions. Today, no one knows exactly how many people they truly killed. It might be 3, it might be dozens. What we do know is they murdered, they lied, and they made a mockery of justice. But for at least a few victims, like Henry Lucas's own mother, the horror was real, and it started long before the headlines.
Big fire.
Can you see it?
Big fire. You bet I can see it. Some house just exploded and ignited on fire.
Wait, were there people inside the house?
Yes, there are. They're probably dead.
April 10th, 2001, at 8:42 a.m., a massive explosion rips through a quiet suburban neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. The Fisher family home was up in flames. The blast was so strong it shook nearby houses and sent a column of smoke 20 feet into the sky. After it was over, firefighters discovered 3 bodies, Mary Fisher and her 2 kids, Brittany and Bobby, but no sign of Robert Fisher, Mary's husband, or her car. So, by the end of the day, Robert Fisher was no longer just a missing person. He's the prime suspect in a chilling triple murder, and the beginning of a manhunt that would last for decades. On the surface, Robert William Fisher seemed like your average family guy. He's born in 1961 in Brooklyn, New York, and had served in the Navy, and worked as a firefighter, surgical technician, and respiratory therapist. He marries Mary Cooper in 1987, and they have 2 kids. He's active in church, and he smiles for all his family photos. But behind closed doors, things were very different. Now, Fisher was described as controlling, emotionally distant, and at times outright cruel. Friends said he treated his wife and kids like they were beneath him. He wouldn't let Mary decorate the house, and he once threw their children off a boat to teach them how to swim. He even turned a hose on Mary during a fight. So this guy was deeply obsessed with his idea of family, mostly because of how his own had fallen apart. His parents divorced when he was 15, and it kinda scarred him. He once told a friend,
"My life would have been different if my mother hadn't left."
So when Mary began talking about divorce in early 2001, something snapped in Fisher. On the night of April 8th, neighbors reported hearing a heated argument coming from the Fisher home around 10 p.m. Hours later, Fisher's caught on an ATM security cam, calmly withdrawing $280. Mary's SUV's in the background. By morning, the house was gone. When investigators dug into the wreckage, they make a horrifying discovery. Mary had been shot in the head, and Brittany's and Bobby's throats were slit. Then the house had been rigged to explode. Fisher had pulled out the gas line from the furnace and lit a candle as a makeshift time delay fuse. The gas filled the house overnight, and when it ignited, the blast flattened the front wall and sent debris flying half a mile away. 10 days later, police find Mary's Toyota 4Runner abandoned in Tonto National Forest, more than 100 miles away. The family's dog, Blue, was found alive, hiding under the car. Fisher's favorite Oakland Raiders cap was inside, but there was no sign of Fisher himself. Now, some believed he used his survival skills to escape through the forest. Many think he's hiding out in a nearby cave system. Others think he kinda died out there. His body simply just never found. But a growing number of people believe he made it out and disappeared into a new life. For years, Fisher's face was everywhere. He made the FBI's 10 Most Wanted in 2002. He's profiled on shows like America's Most Wanted and The Hunt with John Walsh. There were alleged sightings everywhere, from Canada to Guatemala, and even a dramatic SWAT raid in Colorado. But these were all false alarms. By 2021, the feds quietly removed him from the top 10. Not because he was caught, but because after 20 years, the trail just gone cold. Still, Fisher remains a wanted fugitive. Authorities really believe he could be living off the grid, blending in somewhere as a handyman, or even raising a new family under a new name. And that's the part that scares investigators the most. One officer said,
If he started a new family, what happens when he feels trapped again?
A horrific monster. That's who John List was. Self-centered, devious, cunning.
November 9th, 1971. John List woke up in his home in Westfield, New Jersey, got dressed in a suit, made some breakfast, and kissed his 3 kids goodbye before they went to school. It looked like a normal day. And then he walked into the kitchen and shot his wife in the back of the head. He didn't stop there. He climbs up the stairs and kills his elderly mother. And when his kids came home that afternoon, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, he shot each of them, one by one. After cleaning up, he sat down to eat his lunch. Now, you might picture a cold-blooded monster with no trace of emotion. I would. But the truth is, John List didn't really look like a killer. This guy was an accountant, a Sunday school teacher, and a quiet father of 5 who just kept to himself. But I guess behind the calm was a man slowly falling apart, financially, emotionally, and mentally. By the time anyone realized the family was missing, John List was already gone. And what followed wasn't just a murder investigation. It became one of the longest and most bizarre manhunts in American history. 1925. John List was born and raised in a strict German Lutheran home in Michigan. His father was authoritarian. His mother, Alma, was deeply religious. And he grows up believing in structure, duty, and appearances, values he'd cling to for the rest of his life. He would serve in the army, earn a degree in accounting, and eventually marry Helen, a widow with a daughter. They had 3 more children and settle into a 19-room Victorian mansion in an upscale New Jersey suburb. I mean, from the outside, they looked like the picture-perfect American family. But again, behind closed doors, things were falling apart. By 1971, List had lost his job, and his pride wouldn't let him admit it. Every day, he dressed in a suit and left the house, pretending to go to work. In reality, he was sitting at the train station reading newspapers, trying to figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, his marriage is collapsing. Helen's battling alcoholism and untreated syphilis, and her physical and mental health are deteriorating. She's mocking him, comparing him to her first husband, and withdrew from the world. So List looks at his kids and believes that they're growing up in a godless, broken home, and he fears that they're going to turn away from religion. Even worse, he's fearing the shame of going on welfare. In his mind, man, there's only one solution. November 9th, List put his plan into motion. After killing his wife and mother, he waits for his children to get back from school. He shoots all 3 of them. He shot Patricia, then Frederick. Hours later, he picks up John Jr. from soccer practice, and when John would fight back, List shoots him multiple times. He laid the bodies of his wife and kids on sleeping bags in the ballroom. His mother's body remained upstairs. And then he turned on a religious radio station, writes a 5-page letter to his pastor explaining that he had saved their souls, and vanishes. Now, believe it or not, no one noticed these murders for nearly a month. List had written letters to the kids' school saying that they were visiting relatives. He stopped the family's mail, milk, and newspaper deliveries. He would crank up the air conditioning to slow down the body's decomposition. The massive mansion sat quietly, with lights on day and night. Eventually, neighbors got suspicious. When police entered the house on December 7th, they found the bodies and a chilling letter on the desk. By then, John List had vanished, with nearly a month's head start. Yeah, he wouldn't just disappear. He erased himself and started from scratch. He moves across the country, steals the identity of a former college classmate, and becomes Bob Clark. He started all over in Colorado, joined a church, got remarried, and lived quietly for nearly 2 decades. For 18 years, this guy's living like nothing had happened. He's even working as an accountant again, and help organize church carpools, like it's sick. And for the police, the trail had gone cold, until television changed everything. In 1989, America's Most Wanted aired a segment about the unsolved List murders. The show featured an aged, progressed bust of what List might look like. It was disturbingly accurate. A former neighbor in Denver recognized him and called the FBI. On June 1st, 1989, John List was arrested in Virginia, still living as Bob Clark. He initially denies everything, but fingerprints and evidence left no doubt. In court, he claims he killed his family to save their souls, that he didn't want them to suffer through poverty and humiliation. He said he believed that they were better off in heaven now and that he'd hope to join them someday. Oh, the judge wasn't buying it. He said,
John Emil List is without remorse and honor.
List was given 5 consecutive life sentences, the maximum allowed. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, mostly quiet. In one interview, he admitted regret, but also said that he didn't take his own life because it would have kept him out of heaven. The guy dies of pneumonia in 2008 at age 82. His story is still haunting the town of Westfield. To this day, they're still calling him the boogeyman of Westfield, because John List wasn't a stranger. He was your neighbor, the father at church, the man with a polite smile, and the kind of killer who almost gets away forever.
Come to make myself live with the fact that I killed 3 defenseless children.
First of all, you're wrong saying about defenseless because everybody in that house was defenseless.
November 13th, 1974. It was just after 6:30 p.m. in Amityville, New York, when a man burst into Henry's bar, wide-eyed and shaken, repeating,
Gotta help me. I think my mother and father have been shot.
That man was 23-year-old Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. Minutes later, he and a few locals rushed to his house at 112 Ocean Avenue, and what they found inside would leave the whole town shaken to this very day. All 6 members of the DeFeo family, his parents and 4 siblings, had been shot to death in their beds. So, what happened? From the outside, the DeFeos looked like your perfect suburban family. Upper middle class, church-going, friendly. The kind of people who waved at neighbors and held Sunday prayer gatherings in their living room. But inside this house, things weren't so perfect. Ronald Sr., the father, was pretty strict, short-tempered, and sometimes violent. He ran the household with an iron grip. His wife Louise mostly stayed quiet. Butch, their oldest son, often ended up on the receiving end of his father's anger. So as Butch got older, things spiraled. He was bullied in school for being overweight, and by the time he hits late adolescence, he's pretty angry, volatile, and spiraling out of control. The DeFeos try to help. They send Butch to therapy, but he refuses to go. They gave him gifts, cash, even a job at the family's dealership. Nothing worked. He used the money to buy drugs and guns. He picked fight with coworkers and once pulled a shotgun on his father during an argument. In October 1974, just a month before the murders, Butch tried to stage a fake robbery with a friend and steal $20,000 from the dealership. When the police showed up asking questions, his father confronted him. Butch snapped and threatened to kill him. Naturally, no one thought he meant it. But then, in the early hours of November 13th, Butch walks through his home with a .35 caliber rifle. First, he shoots his parents in their bed. Then, one by one, he killed his siblings, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew, all shot while they slept. Afterward, he cleaned up, changed clothes, got rid of the gun and bloody evidence, and went to work like nothing had happened. He spent the day calling home in front of friends, pretending to be worried when no one answered. Then later that night, he runs into the bar and stages his big discovery.
He came, he opened the door, and he was screaming, "Come on, help me, somebody shot my mother and father." And everyone ran out of the bar, and that was it.
At first, Butch blamed a mob hitman, even gave a name, but the man had a solid alibi. He was out of town. The next day, DeFeo knew he was cornered, so he confessed. He tells police,
Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast.
Later, he said that he heard voices telling him to do it, that demons made him pull the trigger. His lawyer argued insanity, but psychiatrists said otherwise. He knew exactly what he was doing. In 1975, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was found guilty on all 6 counts of second-degree murder. He's sentenced to 25 to life. But the story doesn't end here. A year later, a new family moves into the house. The Lutzes. They lasted just 28 days before fleeing, claiming the house was haunted by evil spirits. And that's how that whole Amityville horror legend began. The house became famous, man. And next followed a wave of books, movies, and documentaries. It essentially turned it into a franchise. But really, the real horror had already happened long before the cameras showed up. In prison, DeFeo changed his story more times than anyone could count. First, he blamed his sister, Dawn. He even went on to claim that he was married and wasn't even there that night. Later, he said his lawyer told him to lie about hearing voices so they could sell a book and a movie deal. He even tried to get a new trial. It didn't work. At a 1999 parole hearing, he said,
"I loved my family very much."
But it was too late for that. March 12, 2021. Ronald DeFeo Jr. dies in prison at the age of 69. The official cause of death was never released. The house still stands on Ocean Avenue, renovated, renamed, and sold off to new owners. But the legend still lives on.
In Arkansas, investigators continue to look into one of the nation's worst cases of mass murder.
It's December 22nd, 1987. At a quiet home near Dover, Arkansas, Ronald Gene Simmons sat with a grim plan. It was days before Christmas, right? A time when the entire family would be together under one roof. And for Simmons, that wasn't a cause for celebration, but a window of opportunity. In just over a week, he'd go on to commit the deadliest mass murder by a single individual in Arkansas history. And the most chilling part, he started with his own family. A few weeks before the holiday, Simmons had his kids dig a large hole in the backyard. He told them it was for a new outhouse. Yeah, that would become a mass grave. On the morning of December 22nd, Simmons started his killing spree by murdering his wife, Becky, and their oldest son, Ronald Gene Simmons Jr. He bludgeoned him and shot him with a .22 caliber pistol. Next, he strangled his granddaughter, Barbara, and dumped all 3 bodies into the pit behind the house. Then he waited. That afternoon, 4 of his children came home from school excited for the holidays. One by one, Simmons separated and killed them, each one strangled, and was believed to be held underwater in a barrel Simmons had filled in the bathroom just for that purpose. They still wore their school outfits. One had gum in her mouth, and another had a lunch ticket in his pocket. The youngest still had barrettes in her hair. He places the bodies in the same pit, and then he gets drunk and spends the night punching holes in the drywall. 3 days later, on December 26th, it's time for phase 2. Simmons invites more relatives to the house under the pretense of a holiday reunion. It would have been the first time the entire family was together, and by midday, they started arriving, one by one. First, his son Billy and daughter-in-law Renata. He shoots them both. Then he strangles their son Trey. And then he moves on to Sheila, his eldest daughter, whom he'd reportedly sexually abused years earlier, and her husband Dennis. Again, both were shot. He then strangled his granddaughter Sylvia and her brother Michael. He lines up the bodies in the living room, covers them all with coats, except for Sheila, whom he covered with Becky's best tablecloth. The grandchildren, however, are wrapped in plastic and placed inside abandoned cars at the end of the driveway. After wiping out his entire family, 14 people in total, Simmons drives into town and disturbingly picked up the Christmas gifts he had ordered for him. Then came December 28th, the first Monday after Christmas, and surprisingly, Simmons wasn't done. That morning, he writes 3 letters and mails them, each containing $250 and a cryptic message to his mother-in-law and 2 nieces, saying,
"Sometimes you reap many more times what you sow. Keep this in remembrance of us."
Now, Simmons was a person who couldn't hold a steady job. He often got fired, and people said he was pretty angry, rude, and just off. But he still felt wronged. So he loaded up his son's Toyota and drove to Russellville. His first stop was a law firm, where he shoots and kills Kathy Kendrick, an old co-worker who'd rejected his advances. And then, at the oil company where he used to work, he shot and wounded the owner, Russell Taylor, and killed the delivery driver, James Chaffin. Then he goes on to a convenience store, where he shoots the owner and an employee, but luckily both survived. He moves on to Woodland Motor Freight, his former employer, where he shot his old supervisor, Joyce Butts, in the head and chest. Miraculously, she survived, but would remain partially paralyzed. Before leaving, Simmons handed a hostage a note and calmly said,
"I've come to do what I wanted to do. It's all over now. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me."
When police arrived, Simmons didn't fight. He hands over his revolver and surrenders quietly. When asked why he didn't kill himself, he said that he was afraid he'd mess it up and end up a vegetable. In total, Ronald Gene Simmons killed 16 people, 14 of them family, and 2 others would die in Russellville. 4 more were seriously injured. At trial, Simmons refused to appeal his death sentence. He tells the courts that he wanted to die. In 1990, he gets that wish, executed by lethal injection. the oldest person on death row at the time. His case remains one of the deadliest mass murders in American history, committed by a single person.
The seat of the fire was inside the front door below the letterbox, and there is a clear indication that petrol was used as the accelerant.
It's May 11th, 2012, just after 4 a.m. A fire tears through a modest house in Derby, England. Inside would be 5 sleeping boys and a girl. By the time firefighters get there, it's too late. 5 were already dead, and the 6th would later die in the hospital. At first, the public would grieve with the parents, Mick and Marie Philpot, offering support, donating to funeral funds, and even watching in tears as the couple gave a press conference, visibly heartbroken. But you know, something felt off.
First of all, I want to thank my 3 oldest children because they are helping us to cope with what's going on.
What seemed like a tragic accident soon unraveled into one of the most disturbing cases in recent British memory. And at the center of it all was the father, Mick Philpot. Now, before the fire, Mick wasn't unknown. In fact, he'd made several appearances on TV, mostly for his strange domestic setup, being one man with 2 women, his wife Marie and his mistress Lisa, and a full house of kids, 17 in total, from multiple women. He was often slammed in the tabloids for living off state benefits while having multiple relationships at the same time, and even under one roof. He once appears on the Jeremy Kyle Show, and even stars in a documentary where a conservative member of parliament, Anne Widdecombe, tried and failed to convince him to change his ways. She left early, calling his attitude toward women disturbing, and she wasn't wrong. Behind the headlines, Mick was a deeply controlling, dangerous man. He treated women as property, barking orders like a king of his kingdom, and manipulated everyone around him. Philpot's obsession with control wasn't new. Back in 1978, he was convicted of attempted murder after stabbing his girlfriend more than a dozen times when she tried to leave him. He even stabbed her mother when she tried to help. The girlfriend barely survived, and surprisingly, Philpot served only 3 years in prison for that. So after getting out, he bounces from one relationship to another, again abusing, manipulating, and controlling each woman in turn. He has kids with most of them. A former partner said she used to pray he would leave her alone and find someone else. He eventually did, and the cycle continued. 2000, when he met Marie Duffy. She was a 19-year-old single mom escaping her own troubled past. He swept in like a guardian angel, and she moved into his house. Soon after, he brings in Lisa Willis, another young woman, as a live-in mistress. Both women worked, and both handed him their wages. And yet, neither had a house key. Mick controlled everything, man. From money to sex to who got to sleep in his caravan each night.
I'm old-fashioned, I believe the man should be at work, but unfortunately, because the media keeps putting a certain story in the paper, I cannot get a job.
You can't get a job because of what?
Criminal record.
By 2012, things were falling apart. Lisa Willis had finally had enough. She leaves Mick and takes her 5 kids with her, including 4 he'd fathered. That was the final straw for him. Philpot couldn't stand the idea that someone had left him, especially a woman. He became obsessed with getting Lisa back, and with punishing her. He had a custody hearing scheduled the very morning of the fire. So, Mick comes up with a plan. He's gonna set the house on fire with the kids inside, and then heroically rescue them and blame it all on Lisa. He thought that was gonna make him look like the victim, the devoted father. This guy was looking for sympathy, custody, and like always, control. Instead, he kills 6 of his own children. So the fire starts in the early hours of May 11th. He pours gasoline through the mailbox. And then Mick, Marie, and their friend Paul Mosley, who helped with the plan, set it on fire. But something went horribly wrong. The smoke spread faster than they expected, and there was no way to save the kids. There was no heroic rescue, just absolute tragedy. John, Dwayne, Jack, Jesse, Jaden, and Jade, all gone because their father couldn't stand losing control. In the aftermath, the nation mourned, feeling sorry for the bereaved parents, but behind the scenes, detectives were getting suspicious. Philpot's behavior after the fire didn't sit right with investigators. He seemed to enjoy the media attention. He gave press interviews, visited memorials, and even cried on camera. But something about it felt fake. Police bugged the hotel room where Mick and Marie were staying, and what they heard confirmed suspicion. Lies, manipulation, and a disturbing lack of remorse. They even caught Marie performing a sex act on Mosley while supposedly grieving. Investigators would dig deeper and find that the gas on their clothes matched it to a container tossed nearby. And so the truth came out. They're arrested and charged with murder, later downgraded to manslaughter, since the court ruled they didn't intend to kill the boys and girl, only to frame Lisa and win sympathy. The trial shocks the nation. Mick Philpot, Mareed, and Mosley were all found guilty of manslaughter. The judge calls Philpot a disturbingly dangerous man with no moral compass. He's sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years. Mareed and Mosley were given 17 years each. Mareed was later released on license in 2020. Philpot remains behind bars.
I hope that she's somewhere safe right now and with the kids. But if somebody has her and they're not safe, I want them back now.
We go to August 13th, 2018. Looks like the perfect American family had vanished into thin air. Shannon Watts was 34 years old, 15 weeks pregnant, and had just returned from a business trip to her house in Frederick, Colorado. Her friend dropped her off at the family home around 2 a.m., and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Later that morning, she misses a doctor's appointment. She doesn't respond to texts, and her phone was off. Yet her purse, her wedding ring, and car were still at home. But no one was there. Shannon, along with her 2 daughters, Bella and Cece, were gone. Chris Watts, the husband and father, stands on his front porch in front of TV cameras, asking for help. His voice was pretty calm as he's begging them to come home. He said,
"I just want them back. This house isn't complete without them."
So what no one knew was that they were already dead, and he was the one who killed them. Just 3 days after that TV interview, investigators had put all the pieces together. Chris Watts was arrested, and the story that came out was even worse than anyone could have imagined. In the early hours of August 13th, after an argument about divorce, Chris strangled Shannon in their bedroom. According to his later confession, she told him that he would never see their daughters again, and instead of just walking away, he snaps, and he puts his hands around her neck and doesn't stop until she's gone. But it doesn't stop there because their daughter Bella had walked in during the murder. Chris tells her that Shannon was sick. Then, with his pregnant wife dead at his feet, he carried her body down the stairs while Bella watched. He then loaded Shannon's body into the backseat of his truck and strapped Bella and her sister Cece into their car seats, right beside their mother's corpse. Then he drives them all the way to this oil site owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. It's about 45 minutes away. And what happened next was the kind of thing that leaves a permanent crack in your soul. At this site, Chris smothered Cece first, using one of their blankets. Then he dropped her body into a massive oil tank. Bella, who had just watched her sister die, asked him,
"Is the same thing gonna happen to me as Cece?"
Chris said yes, and then he kills her too. She fights back. The autopsy shows that she bit her tongue multiple times, and a strand of her blonde hair was later found near the hatch of the oil tank, where he shoved her body through an opening barely 8 inches wide. Finally, he buried Shannon in a shallow grave nearby. She was wearing a shirt that read, "Oops, we did it again," a reference to the boy they were expecting. They were going to call him Nico. When police brought Chris in for questioning, he lied at first, saying that he had no idea where they were. But investigators weren't buying this. Oh, not only that, but he failed a polygraph badly.
So it is completely clear that you were not honest during the testing, and I think you already know that. He did not pass the polygraph test. Okay.
Then, alone in the interrogation room with his father, Chris finally broke. He admitted to killing Shannon, but twisted the story around, claiming she had killed Bella and Cece and he had killed her in rage. It was a lie, a desperate one.
I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, they came back up and they were gone.
The truth comes out piece by piece. Forensic evidence, the security footage, the GPS data, and most damning of all, a neighbor's doorbell cam that showed Chris back in his truck into the garage in the early hours of August 13th. He had just loaded something and then drove off. November 6th, 2018. Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all the charges. Shannon's family didn't want the death penalty. They didn't want more death, only justice. The judge gives him 5 life sentences with no chance of parole, plus 84 more years for the death of his unborn son and for tampering with the bodies.
Perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen.
Shannon's father said in court,
"I trusted you to take care of him, not kill him."
Today, Chris Watts is serving his sentence at the max security prison in Wisconsin. In later confessions, he admitted he'd been planning the murders for weeks. He even drugged Shannon with OxyContin at one point, hoping to cause a miscarriage, just to make it easier to leave for his new girlfriend. So what happened was never a moment of rage. It was a cold, calculated plan, one that destroyed an entire family. And the most haunting part was that after everything he'd done, Watts had still tried to play the grieving husband on TV.